know you all realize the problems associated with being dehydrated. And so you may be thinking to yourself, I need to start drinking more water. That'll solve my hydration problem. Well, maybe, but that could also lead to what we call hyperhydration. And so you don't want to just drink more water, you want to find out how to actually optimize your hydration status. Right? So looking at an online calculator that tells you how much water to drink throughout the day, no, right? We can do better than that. That's not what it takes to be optimally hydrated. All right, so what I want to present to you in this condensed version is how to develop individualized hydration plans to help you optimize your performance. Now, I have recently filmed a couple of mega episodes on this topic, several hours worth. Right? But in this version, I'm going to skip to the very basics and get just to the practical application portion, so what to do and how to do it. Okay, if you want to know more about the physiology, how it's working, more recent research, specific numbers, I would encourage you to go check out that 2-part 55-minute physiology series. But if you're just here for the what to do and how to do it, I welcome you, and let's jump into this episode of 25-minute physiology. All right, so I'm titling this talk the 3 steps to optimizing hydration. So I'll break this thing down to you in 3 steps. Okay, so our solution is really a function of, first and foremost, making sure you start in a euhydrated state, and I'll talk about what that is. Then you have to prevent what we call hypohydration as a result of either exercise or work. And then you have to, part 3 or step 3 is fully replenish the fluids you lost during that exercise or work session. Okay, so let's go from the beginning, 1, 2, and 3, and I'll show you exactly what they mean, how to do it, and what numbers you want to hit. Let's roll. All right, now part of number 2 is relying on part number 1, right? So the best way to stay optimally hydrated during your workouts is to start hydrated in the first place. And then likewise, the only way to continue euhydration is to make sure that you replenish the stuff from exercise. So really it's 3 parts, but it's all one circular system, if you will. Another way to think about this, I guess more simplistically, is how much and what to drink during the day, during your workouts, and after. So let's get started with step number 1, which is starting euhydrated. Now again, you may have heard things like, oh, drink a gallon of water a day, or 8 glasses, or maybe more specifically, half your body weight, this would be in pounds, in ounces per water. So if you weigh 200 pounds, half your body weight is 100 pounds. So drink 100 ounces of water, not 100 pounds of water. And that's a lot better, of course, right? The difference between that last one, the one in yellow, and the first 2 is at least it's relative to your body size. So we don't have a 125-pound person trying to drink the same amount of water as a 300-pound person. That doesn't make any sense. So if you want to just hedge your bets and start there, that's a lot better than just drinking a certain number of glasses of water per day. But you do need to take into context what your day looks like. So I'm not going to go into the details. You can stop the video and look at this, the results of this study here. But the point is, you need to consider really 2 functions. 1, how hot and humid it is where you're working, and then 2, how much you're working the day. So you could be as little as, say, 2 liters, about a half a gallon a day, or you could be as high as 10 liters, right? So 5 times that amount. And that needs to be adjusted based on both the temperature and the work. So start with that half thing I just showed you, half body weight per ounces, and then scale up or down based on the, well, at least scale up based on the humidity and the amount of work you do. Okay, so we also have to consider our diet. So where our water comes from in our life, about 50% of it comes from just, drinking water, exogenously is what we'll call it. 30% comes from other fluids, coffee, tea, etc. And about 20% comes from our food. But this last 20% we know is wildly different between people. So depending on your diet, that number may be 30%, maybe 10%, or could be, I guess, significantly even different from that. So most fruits and vegetables are 85% or higher in terms of water content, right? Meaning if you're eating a diet full of these things, you're actually getting a lot of water just in your food. Even products like eggs and meat are still actually mostly water. And so eating a diet composed of things like this is going to get you a lot of water content. Eating a diet composed of things like this, and I'm not against biscuits, but they're incredibly dense, okay? So what we know is highly processed foods have lower water content, a lot of times because they've been baked or cooked or fried out, as well as excessively high salt intake. Now, we don't mind salt. In fact, we're going to go out of our way to get salt. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But these things come pretty excessively, right? So if you need to get, say, 4 grams of salt in today, you could probably easily get that or more in 1 meal of things like this. And if you have 2 or 3 meals like this, you're actually getting way too high a salt content. This is particularly problematic for people who are overweight and physically inactive. If you're an active person, salt's a good thing, right? But it's always about context and amount. Point being, if you have a diet like this, again, water-sparse foods and highly processed, meaning highly salted, that 20% may go down to, say, 10%. And so what you actually have to do then is go significantly up in the amount of water you go out of your way to get. So in this case, you may have to go up to 3/4 of your body weight in ounces per day to hit those official numbers, okay? Or the other solution, so you don't have to sit around drinking so much water, is just to eat more real whole fresh food. Okay, so then rather than relying on a stupid generic number, I actually recommend that you measure and see. And so this is how you should do it. First thing when you wake up, or as close to it, you should actually measure your hydration. And one way to do it, if you're a super nerd, is you could buy things like this. Now, these are not that expensive. I guess that expensive is sort of relative. But you can measure hydration kits. There's all kinds of ways to do it. I've used this one specifically with some of my athletes. We have these in our laboratory. And they're not that expensive. And you can measure your hydration status. Or you can buy certain scales. Now, a lot of these things commercially available, not even that expensive, will actually tell you your body weight, body percentage, as well as your hydration level. Now, they're not perfectly accurate, but they're probably fairly reliable, so you can use them day in and day out, and at least you would notice major changes in your hydration status. If that's still too rich for your blood, you can use an even simpler system, which is a combination of two things. One, how thirsty you feel in the morning. Call it a scale of 1 to 10. Jot it down, as well as the color of your urine. I like to combine both of these things so you're not kind of thrown off. For example, if you're just breathing a lot through your mouth overnight, you may feel like a dry mouth and you may feel thirsty. And you're not actually that, you just have a dry mouth because you're not breathing through your nose properly at night. So I like to combine them both, okay? And you can look at this chart here or many others regarding how what the color of your urine should be. And I'll give you a hint, it shouldn't be crystal clear. Not that that's bad for you, but you're probably drinking too much pure water if you're peeing out, a diamond-colored urine. It should have a light tinge to it for the most part. Okay? So, to recap part number 1, starting your day and being just you hydrated throughout the day. Start by drinking, that amount of water like we talked about. Measure your hydration status with those, whichever method I just explained to you. And then adjust the amount of water you're drinking throughout the day based on your diet, lifestyle, and various other environmental factors. So let's move on to step number 2, preventing exercise-induced or work-induced or competition-induced hypohydration. Well, this is a really big deal for performance. In fact, we see that being dehydrated by as little as 1 to 2% can have significant reductions in your physical performance or your ability. Now, when I say 1 to 2%, what I mean is you've lost that percentage of body weight. So again, let's imagine you are 200 pounds and you've lost 1%. That would be 2 pounds of water, okay? So that's how we determine percent. It's not percent dehydration, it's percent of body weight loss. Nonetheless, so you can see people out to here, right? Imagine you got somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 2.5% dehydrated, which you wouldn't feel that awful, right? Honestly, that probably happens with hanging out in the jacuzzi one night. You could lose that amount with really even feeling it. Well, your exercise capacity is already down 10%. Well, if you're a performance athlete, either in competition or in training, losing 10% right out the gates is, that's it. That's the difference between making the team and being an all-star. You got a job or you don't, right? It's a big, big, big deal. So an example I could give you here is imagine a 185-pound athlete. You can see that losing 2 pounds would be a 1% reduction, and again, you wouldn't even feel that necessarily. Most sweat weights are somewhere between 1 to 5 pounds per hour, and most of the athletes I've ever worked with are at least 3 or higher. 6 pounds plus is not that crazy for this size of an athlete. And so it's not very difficult at all to lose 3, 4, 5 pounds in an hour if you're not drinking any water back. All right, so that becomes a real problem. The other thing that we know that happens is slight reductions in hydration status have pretty large increases in perceptual strain. In other words, you may be performing at the same level, but it feels a lot harder. And I don't have to explain to you why that sucks. All right? Moreover, several studies have shown things like even slight reductions in hydration can influence skill things like accuracy. For example, this study showed that basketball players had a progressive deterioration in performance in both time and accuracy of shooting as their dehydration progressed from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4%. They continually got worse, worse, and worse, and worse. So stopping yourself at that 1% or going from 2 to 3, even that little amount right there can, be the difference between competition, right? So how much do you drink during this game or competition or workout? Well, it is individualized, and I would encourage you to check out this really nice article. I believe it's open and free access, so you can Google the title and go read it. And they lay out the fact that there's a lot of different things going into how much you need to drink. And so the exact solution depends on all these factors like airflow, what clothing you're wearing, male or female, how big you are, the length of the session, the altitude, etc. Okay? But the point is it requires individualization. So, as I was mentioning, some typical sweat rates are between 1 to 5 pounds per hour or so. And that depends on body size, exercise intensity, duration, your prehydration status. In other words, if you start off dehydrated, you don't sweat as much. If you're overhydrated, you'll sweat more. And the heat and humidity. These are the 5 big categories that I pay attention to. And I will kind of just scale up or down depending on how these things are modified once I know the baseline or normal sweat rate of the individuals. And so I'll give you kind of a cheating method for how much water to drink right now. What the research will typically say is we want to go for 2 milliliters of water per kilogram of body weight per 15 minutes or so. An easy way to get to that, my cheating method, is just take their body weight in pounds and divide it by 30. Okay, so you can see the example here, that 185-pound athlete divided by 30 would be 6. Okay, that would be roughly equivalent to the other method, the 2 by kilograms a minute, which would give you 5.6. The difference between 5.6 ounces and 6 ounces is the same exact thing when it comes to actually doing this in real life. So I think my method of divide by 30 is pretty good. And you would drink that every 15 minutes. Now I know you don't know what ounces really are, or you're not familiar with those numbers. And so I've said, okay, imagine this. An Aquafina bottle or something that you get at the grocery store, they're usually in 16 or 20 ounce bottles. Just take a look. If it's a 20 ounce bottle, you need to get somewhere between 5 and 6 ounces in. You're going to drink a quarter of that. Plus or minus. Okay, that's probably pretty close for most of us. In fact, if you just wanted to give everyone like 5 or 6 ounces every 15 minutes, regardless of size, it's probably pretty close. Okay, you do want to give them prescriptions, and you want to give them numbers, and you want to give them markers to hit though, because we know very clearly from the research that thirst during exercise is a very poor indicator of how much water to drink. Now, outside of exercise, like checking it first thing in the morning, it's actually pretty okay. But given to left to their own accord, we know that people will drink only about half the fluids that they need on their own volition, right? Especially in the cold, right? So you can see this athlete here making a pretty poor hydration choice during her hiking workout. Naughty Tatiana, right? So 4 tips that you can do to help people or your athletes drink more water. Number 1, make sure it's the right temperature. So people tend to like cool water, but not extremely cold. Give it some flavor, add some salt, and then make sure it's visible. In other words, make sure it's in their line of sight. So don't put it in the corner way behind the bleachers. Make sure that between every rep and drill, they see water, and it's going to remind them, oh yeah, drink my fluids, drink my fluid. So when you do those 4 things, the amount of voluntary fluid intake goes up significantly. So that's something that can really, really help you. And if it's, again, you yourself, make sure your water bottle is right there in front of your squat rack or off to the corner. Don't hide it in the corner or bury it off in the corner of the gym somewhere. Okay, so now that we understand a little bit more about how much to drink during our workouts, what should actually be in the drink? I just mentioned we want some flavor and some salt, but how much? Let's talk about it. We know that the answer is not just straight water, partially because of what I just told you. If you give them just straight water, they don't drink enough. But also because if we think about it this way, the problem is you're sweating, right? You're not sweating water, you're sweating sweat. So you don't want to drink back water, you want to drink back sweat. So we have to then take a second to look at what are the actual contents in sweat, right? Well, we know it's primarily this. Sodium, chloride, potassium, and glucose are the things you mostly lose during exercise. Now you maybe lose a tiny bit of magnesium, but it's not a significant player. And of this, the vast majority of it's going to be the sodium and chloride. In fact, it's about a 4-to-1 ratio of sodium and chloride to potassium. All right, so if you lose a gram of sodium, you probably lose like 250 milligrams of potassium. A gram of sodium would also probably mean a gram of chloride, plus or minus. All right, so we want to drink back a fluid that is the exact same concentration as the concentration in our cells. So we have most of our fluid is in our cell, in between our cells, which is called the interstitial space, or in our plasma, one of those 3 areas. Okay, if we drink back things that are too dilute, say just water, the part in between the cells and the blood gets really expanded, but it's also incredibly dilute. So there does not enough time for your body to pull the water into the cell from there, so you actually end up peeing out a lot of the fluid. So too dilute means you waste a lot of the fluids. You're not optimally actually rehydrating. You're putting water in your body and then you're peeing it right back out. You're also then turning off your thirst sensors, so you don't think you have to drink as more because you're not as thirsty until you start peeing clear and you're thinking you're hydrated when you're actually not. The inverse, if you drink something too concentrated, so too salty, too much electrolyte in it, you can actually pull fluid into your intestines, right? So this fluid you drink goes in your gut and it should then go into your plasma. But it has to go through a little bit of digestion, and when it does that, since it's so concentrated, it pulls water from the plasma in there, osmosis, right? We want to balance both sides here. And when you pull a bunch of water into your intestines, you know what happens, right? So too dilute, you pee too much and you're not hydrated. Too concentrated, you get diarrhea. So we want to avoid those situations entirely. And we can do that by understanding truly what is in our sweat. And so on average, if you were to lose 1 liter of sweat, which would be a fairly normal number, 2.2 pounds, let's say in an hour, again, this would be average to maybe even a little bit low of a sweat rate, what would be in that 1 liter? Probably something like anywhere between 500 to 2,000 milligrams. 2,000 milligrams is also 2 grams. Right, 1 to 500 milligrams of potassium in that kind of 4-to-1 ratio like I mentioned. And as I said, sodium and chloride seem to be pretty well linked here. There are some small amounts of magnesium, but also keep in mind, even though it's a tiny amount, if you do start sweating a lot, a tiny relative amount magnified over a high absolute volume ends up being a decent amount, right? So even though, say you're sweating out 50 milligrams of magnesium per liter, well, if you sweat out 5 liters, that number actually goes from 50 milligrams to 250 milligrams, which is now actually a significant amount. Okay, so I actually don't mind putting a little bit of magnesium back in as a result of sweat if the sweat volume is a lot. Okay, now, within this, one thing you can do is try to figure out, all right, am I closer to that 500 milligrams of sodium chloride or that 2,000? That's a big difference. Well, you can invest in a number of different things that you can purchase that have sweat patches. You put the sweat patch on and it tells you the amount, the rate, as well as, more importantly, the sodium, chloride, and potassium. And like I said, typically once you know the sodium number, you can guesstimate the chloride's the same, although it's not always true. And then the potassium's the other way. So you can look around the internet and buy any number of those there. You can also just kind of look at your clothing. So if your clothing is covered in white afterwards, so once your shirt and hat dry, then you know you have a pretty high salt content. If it's low, then if it's clear though and there's not a lot of salt residue, then you don't sweat a lot of salt. Most people, I'd say the average is 1,000 milligrams of sodium. That would be kind of like a light sweater. Really heavy folks are maybe 1,500. So those are pretty good range. If you don't know, start at 1,000 milligrams, start at 250 milligrams of potassium, and then 1,000 or so of chloride. All right? So that's what I would recommend. Now, let's say that you went through an actual workout with this individual, and I gave you the kind of relative concentration per liter, but maybe you went through a workout and you lost 2 actual liters. So we double these amounts. So this is what you would look like in terms of most likely sweating. But we also have to account the fact that when you did a 2-hour workout or an hour workout, that you've burned some glucose. And this is critically important because, again, we want to drink sweat. And sweat, you don't sweat out glucose, but you burn glucose as a part of physical activity. So they're highly associated. So we got to bring this back in the equation as well. Okay, so what we want to do is this. I know that if we bring in and just add some salt to our water, we'll take care of that chloride and sodium issue. But we haven't hit potassium, we haven't hit magnesium, and we're missing our sugar content. Okay, so we got to do more than just that. Now, if we took a look at different hydration products, this is what we're looking at. Now, I've done this in terms of amount per 2 liters, right? Because I'm giving you a specific example. You can imagine in 2 liters, this is exactly how much you lost. So you can look over here with what we calculated as what we lost, and over here to what the same amount of fluid would give us. And you can see pretty clearly that things like Powerade and Gatorade, if we lost in this middle range, say 2 grams of sodium and 2 grams of chloride, and we lost 2 liters of fluid, if we drink back 2 liters of Powerade or Gatorade, we're not even getting half of the amount back of sodium we need. So the problem with these sports drinks is they typically don't have nearly enough salt. They also don't have any magnesium, they're low on potassium, and they're okay in terms of they're good in terms of the amount of sugar, but it's also the wrong type of sugar, right? It's not optimal is what I'll say. So can they work? Sure. But are they optimal? No. When we go on to one of the next most popular ones, Pedialyte, we see that it has a really high potassium concentration and the sodium is actually pretty good, but probably too low of carbs and not enough magnesium. The other thing I don't like about these general drinks is you really can't influence content or concentration. So these can't be individualized, right? So in fact, I like other things which are specific hydration products, right? Having said that, if you're also like, hey, I don't like processed things, I just want to have stuff that's all natural. Two other really popular items are coconut water and actually, surprisingly enough, milk. And the beauty of coconut water is it is extremely high in potassium, but it's not high enough in sodium. It's got good and the right types of carbohydrates. So if you're going to use coconut water, you're going to have to come back and add a lot of salt to it, and then maybe even a little bit of carbohydrate. But that's a very viable option. The other one that folks don't think about a lot is actually milk, which is pretty damn good for the most part. You're going to have to add some salt to it, but the nice part about it is it's an excellent potassium source. It's got a good amount of magnesium, and the sugar is almost ideal. So you're there, okay? The other way that I go, to be honest with you, I don't know a lot of folks who like to drink milk during their workouts, so milk really is more of a recovery hydration product than it is an in-workout one. And so my preferred option is actually to use hydration packets. Now, these aren't relative to 2 liters, so these are single packets. And you're typically told to dilute them in 16 ounces of water. So if you actually did that and you scaled that and you multiplied that by 4, you would actually multiply that by 4, and so the amount of, say, sodium you would get in the Electrolytes 70 would be more like 1,400 milligrams, which is a lot closer to that 2,000 milligrams number and a lot higher than this. So these are actually pretty good. You can see that the 3 kind of most classic ones, Electrolyte, Noon, and Drip Drop, are usually in about 2-to-1 potassium, sodium to potassium ratios. I think it should be a little bit higher sodium personally. Electrolyte doesn't have any magnesium. Noon does, but it doesn't have any carbohydrates, which is fine. They're typically not trying to give you the carbohydrates anyways. So you can use them, and again, the thing I like about them the most is it allows you to individualize. So if you wanted someone, say in a 16-ounce water, to have a little bit more sodium or something, or a little bit more total or a little bit less, you can put in half a packet or 3/4 or a packet and a half or whatever. Also, companies like Electrolyte make multiple kinds. So this is Electrolyte 70, they make Electrolyte 90, which is more sodium concentrated. So they actually make different concentrations for you, which is really nice. And then, of course, there's also a new company, Element, which actually has closer to that 5-to-1 ratio, which I think is a little bit better, a good amount of magnesium, but is missing the carbohydrate, okay? So you can use any of these or any combinations of these. For example, you could take a little bit of Element and put that in your coconut water, and boy, you're off to a good start, or whatever else you want to do, okay? You can also then titrate these. So for example, if you're just in a situation where you're sweating but you're not actually working out a lot, then maybe you do go to one of these packs that are a little bit lower in sugar and not something like coconut water, because you don't need as much carbohydrate back, you mainly need the salt and the water. Up to you, right? Depending on your situation. So the best way though to fix all this stuff in reality is trial and error. You're going to have to figure out what works best for you and your athlete, what feels best in their stomach, and what they like the taste of, etc. But to summarize all of point number 2, what to drink during your workouts. That same amount of water we talked about, body weight divided by 30 every 15 minutes or so. Somewhere between a 3 or 4-to-1 sodium chloride to potassium ratio, maybe even some magnesium. A 5 to 9 or so % concentration of mainly glucose and some fructose, and then practice a bunch, right? The other thing you want to do is make sure this fluid is within eyesight. So make sure your individuals can see it. If you do this, you'll have ticked up all the things. They'll see it, they'll drink more. It'll taste good, right temperature, it'll have some salt, and you'll be off your way. Okay, now the problem with this is, if you do some basic calculations here and you use our cheating method, and you said, okay, let's take that 6 ounces and we drink it every 15 minutes, so that's 4 times per hour. That would give us 24 ounces or about 1.5 pounds per hour. Unfortunately, as you may be picking up on, That's not enough total fluid, right? Most people sweat at minimum 1.5 pounds per hour, a lot up to 3, 4, 5 pounds. So in the case of a professional boxer, Mike Lee over here, 5 pounds an hour is not crazy to him. If he followed this number I told you, he would still be 3.5 pounds short. Well, the problem was saying, okay, well, why don't you just drink more? Why don't you go like, 10 ounces per 15 minutes or something? Well, that becomes a problem because of what's called gastric emptying. So there's only so much fluid you can have in your stomach and get out. And depending on what sport you're in, say soccer, you don't have the ability to drink during the game. It's not an option. Boxing is very difficult, right? You only get 1 minute rounds, there's only so much you can get in. And so it's really not just very feasible to get more in during your workout. What's our solution then? Well, number one, you have to start pre-hydrated, and then you have to recover things, which is step number 3, replenishing post-exercise, okay? So, my recommendation for doing this, first of all, you have to measure, and you have to figure out how much am I losing, right? Again, you can use these laboratory methods that I talked about. You can measure your hydration status before and after the workout, or you can simply take your body weight. So get naked, completely dry, weigh yourself. Do your workout, get completely dry, naked, weigh yourself again. If you lost 5 pounds in your workout and you didn't drink any water, then you know exactly what you weighed. Okay? Now, when you do this method, don't forget to account for the water you drink. So in other words, you were 170 before, you finished your workout, now you're 165, but you drank 1.5 pounds of water. Well, then you didn't lose 5 pounds in that workout, 170 to 165. You actually lost 6.5 pounds because you drank 1.5 pounds back already. But then nonetheless, let's just say you were following my thing and I said, okay, great, and you drank 1.5 pounds of water during the workout. And you weighed in pre, you weighed in post, 5 pound difference, you drank your 1 pound water. So you still know that you're short 3.5 pounds. Well, if you go and then drink 3.5 pounds of fluid, it's not going to work because we know you're actually going to urinate that out. So you have to actually drink more than that. In fact, we're going to recommend drinking somewhere between 125 to 150% of that number. So if you needed to actually gain back 3.5 pounds, you actually need to drink more like 5 pounds because some of that's going to be lost in urine, especially if you drink something that's too dilute. All right, so to summarize your post-workout, figuring out how much to drink, you can use what's called the WHAT method. And you can see the article that I got it from here. Bob Kenefick is a legendary hydration scientist from the Army. And he basically said, okay, take your weight, look at your urine color, and your thirst, W-U-T. You combine that together, and if you've got more than 2, say for example, you've lost weight from the workout and your urine is discolored, or you've lost weight and you're thirsty, or the other combination, then it's very likely you're dehydrated. Okay? If you have all 3, you're thirsty, your weight's down, and your urine's discolored, you basically just bank on the fact that you are dehydrated. Okay? So, post-exercise fluids, you should consume about 125 to 150% of the fluid that was lost during exercise. And what do you drink? Drink that exact combination of sweat that we just got done covering in part 2. Okay, so to summarize this entire video here and to give some specific recommendations, the first thing I think you should do in the morning is to wake up and do some assessment of your hydration status. And then from there, I personally like just chugging some water. I will fill up a glass like this, top to brim. It's right next to my bed. I wake up in the morning, do whatever, not much, and the first thing I do would be, I hope you heard the sound of that on the mic. But I will finish that entire thing, right? Just to get myself going on the right track. Okay, so wake up and chug a little bit of water as you first start going. Then I eat a diet that is mostly whole, real, fresh foods, especially fruits and vegetables. And I salt them liberally. Okay, a lot of salt on that stuff, especially when I'm training more. If you're eating more processed and packaged foods, you don't need to go out of your way. In fact, you probably shouldn't go out of your way to add salt to that. If I've missed my mark, right? So in terms of prehydration, we want to drink that at least a half body weight in pounds per ounce, in ounces of water per day. And I adjust the amount based on my context. So my lifestyle, what I do for work, humidity, temperature, am I a heavy sweater, my light sweater, etc., right? And you use the WHAT system, right? So weigh yourself first thing in the morning, check your hydration, and check your thirst. If you miss that, say for example, you didn't get enough of that water in, then you want to hit somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 600 milliliters or 15 to 20 ounces a couple of hours before, and then another 5 or 10 ounces 15 or 20 minutes before the workout. Then we want to perihydrate. So we want to drink fluids during the workout. Again, I said take your body weight in pounds, divide that by 30, and drink that every 15 minutes or so. If that's uncomfortable, keep at it because your gut can improve and won't feel as sloshy after a while. And then you want to drink back sweat, something between that 3 to 4 to 1 sodium to chloride to potassium ratio with that 5 to 9% glucose and some fructose solution. Examples, coconut water with a little bit of salt, maybe add some honey. Or an element and then put that in a dextrose powder. Something like that. You want to assess your sweat content either with the visual thing I said or buying a patch, and experiment with the aforementioned sweat. In other words, try different combinations and cocktails of drinks. And then post-hydration, take your body weight, pre and post your workout, and drink 125% of that or so. Whew. All right. As I mentioned, if you want to know more about the physiology, more of the science, go check out part 1 and part 2 of the 55-minute series. If not, though, I think I did a pretty darn good job of covering all that in kind of close to 25 minutes. I know I was so close. I was trying to knock it out, but I missed. All right. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate all the love, and go get some water. See ya.